Good afternoon, everyone. I thank you for your patience as we were just working out some technical difficulties. But we are here to have a community forum on the operating budget request for school year 23-24. My name is Alicia Perrin, and I am the interim superintendent of Bridgeport Public Schools. And with me this afternoon, I have Mr. Joseph Sokolovic, who is one of our board members who will be helping to present on the matter. Mr. Sokolovic is going to go over the ground rules for this afternoon.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out on this beautiful Saturday. And we've done a lot of better things we could be doing with our time, but this is the most useful use of our time. So some ground rules for today. We will be going over plenty of information here. If you haven't, we will stop for questions, but if you do have any questions, I ask that you restrict to the questions to the material already covered, as we may cover going forward in the presentation. Any questions may be answered. If you have any questions at the end, we'll be happy to answer them. If we cannot answer your questions, we will leave us the information. We can get that information to you as soon as we can.
Thank you. Our goals for this afternoon is to provide a structurally balanced budget, to maintain a structurally balanced budget built on a comprehensive financial plan comprised of all fund sources that ensures real cost management and the most effective educational program possible. Goal 2, school-based budgeting model. To maintain and enhance the school-based budgeting model grounded in empowerment and accountability at the school level. Goal 3, fiscal accountability. To ensure fiscal accountability through continued integrity, transparency, reporting, and systems management. And Goal 4, comprehensive fiscal management. To engage in comprehensive fiscal management encompassing analysis, internal control, and innovation in order to secure resources, optimize resource utilization, and attain fiscal stability.
Yes, in plain English, a structurally balanced budget is a budget where the money spent is equal to the money received. Bridgeport Public Schools is not allowed to go into debt, unlike us, as individuals who could massively overspend using credit cards and loans. Also, unlike the federal, state, and local government, it is illegal for Bridgeport Public Schools to spend more money than it receives. Not only would this be irresponsible, but board members may be held fiscally liable and forced to pay the overages from their own funds. However, just because there has been a balanced budget does not mean our schools are fiscally well off. Bridgeport Public Schools has been massively underfunded for decades and has historically had to resort to layoffs, programming cuts, and creative accounting to ensure a balanced budget. Just recently, since COVID, the Bridgeport Public Schools has been accumulating a structural deficit. Structural deficit is where everything was fine for a short period of time, maybe 2 to 3 years, but eventually we hit a fiscal cliff. Bridgeport Public Schools currently has a structural deficit of around $10 million. Maybe we updated at some point. And Bridgeport Public, and finally, when we're looking at the budget, please note that Bridgeport Public Schools posts all of its audited budgets. Our budgets are audited by the same people that audit the whole city budget, so budgets are audited. So, thank you.
This first slide shows you district enrollment. So if you see there are trends that show you back to 2016-17, all the way up to what's projected for next school year, 23-24. Here in the red, you'll notice that there are several minuses here, and that is to show you that there was a decrease in enrollment starting back in 2017-18 all the way through 21-22. Of course, the most massive decrease we experience was in 2021. During the pandemic, we lost approximately 800 children. Right now, it shows that for this school year, the enrollment is starting to move in the right direction. We have plus 84 according to this data. So this was taken as of 10/1/2022, when we had 19,133 students. Currently, these numbers are a little off because our population is very transient, and we do have students coming in each and every day. So as of yesterday, we had a total of 19,321 students in the district. So based upon the trends from over the years, we have a projected increase of 67 students. But again, this is constantly changing. One of the things to note here at the bottom of this slide, it shows us our population change in regards to special education students and EL students, our multilingual learner population. Here, it shows you SPED as of 10-1, we were at a positive 135 students from year to year. Excuse me one second. Thank you. And here for our multilingual learners, it had us at plus 618. Actually, this number currently is trending at over 800 students. Excuse me.
Yeah, so you notice that we did have trending decreases for years. These past 22 to 23 are increasing, as Ms. Perry noted, and also we're projecting increases for next year. We are the largest district in the state of Connecticut, and that's important to note. And also, when you look at these percentages for special ed and ELL, these needed services are most deservedly given, but they are a very high proportion of our budget, and where we spend there, that takes away from the rest of the general population of students. So as you see, those numbers increased. Why do they increase? Because Bridgeport Public Schools takes each and every learner, and we are obligated morally and legally to educate everybody who comes through our doors, and it's a responsibility we will not shirk. You get some of the other schools that get some of our money, you'll look at their percentage of ELL and special education is much lower than the city of Bridgeport.
One of the things I did want to highlight before moving to the next slide is even though that we've had a constant decline in students, it does not mean that we're able to consolidate classes or buildings to be able to accommodate those things. We still have to keep those sites open, again, because of our population that's continuously increasing with new students coming into the district. So this slide here is net current expenditures per pupil. So this is the money that is supposed to be allocated per year for each child in the city of Bridgeport. On this specific slide, there are our neighboring districts that are very similar in population to us. So we have Hartford, Stamford, New Haven, of course, Bridgeport, and Waterbury. So as of January 2022, you'll notice that Bridgeport was slated to receive $16,954 per student per year. We were, of the 166 Connecticut school districts, we were ranked number 145 in receiving payments for our children. Please note, if you look at our DERG, specifically Waterbury, as Mr. Sokolovic always likes to compare us because we're both similar to, they still were funded outside of Bridgeport. So they received $17,985.49 per student compared to what we received as well. Oh, excuse me, 16,800. And when I was looking at the wrong column, my apologies. All right, of course. So they were the closest to us. But if you notice that we are not receiving equal funding like our neighboring cities and towns.
Yeah, Bridgeport is in second place as far as the lowest end net current expenditure per pupil in our peer districts by $153 behind Waterbury. But that number's been updated since, and we'll see that on the next slide. So back to last.
Now, the major difference between this slide and the last is really the year of the report. So this is from January 2023. And if you notice here for Bridgeport, it notes that we increased to $18,757 per student. But one of the things that is most important to be noted here is that this increase was a result of the monies that we received in ARP and ESSER funds. So we received that one-time expenditure of $144.9 million to be expended over 3 years. This was included in this $18,757 per pupil. So one of the things you do need to take note with that is that that is not something that we received. That was a one-time funding that was given to all school districts in the United States to be able to support the crisis for the pandemic. But that really shouldn't be included here because that is not the monies that we receive to be able to support our students on a regular daily basis. With this inclusion, it did bring us to number 121 out of the 166 school districts. But again, it's not a true representation of what we normally receive for our students.
Yes, now if you look at this this slide as well. The last one, I'm sorry. Oh, with that. Yes, as you can see, although we're underfunded, although we're funded at 16.94, you know what? I'm just gonna skip this one. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. So this is a newest slide. This wasn't in our first two presentations because this came from some new information that we received yesterday from the state. And this is comparisons between Bridgeport Public Schools, Waterbury, New Haven, and Hartford. And this shows you how much money we receive at different levels. So from the local government, the federal, state, and tuition, and others. And I'm going to let Mr. Kolovic speak about this.
I'm actually going to get up for this one point. Yes. Now you look at Bridgeport Public Schools. The local government gives us $3,448 per student. We have Waterbury, 4,634 students. That's about a $1,200 difference per student per pupil. And the reason Waterbury is important because Waterbury is just like us. Cities are very comparable. Now, if you look at New Haven, $4,932 per pupil. From the local government, this is local government. This is coming out of our taxpayer dollars. So the city of New Haven sees fit to give $4,932 per pupil. The city of Bridgeport gives $3,448 per pupil. That's like a $1,500, $1,600 difference right there. And Hartford is a little closer, $3,702 more locally. But they get their expenditures more. If you look at the pink bars, those are the state bars. As you can see, Bridgeport's pink bars are pretty big. The only pink bars that are really bigger than Bridgeport's would be Hartford. And sometimes New Haven, it goes back and forth year to year. So this, while Waterbury Public Schools makes up for the lack of state funding, and then they're spending more per pupil than we do, the city of Bridgeport does not. And this has been the case for decades.
So this slide specifically shows the peer district comparison, again, in just other terms. So it shows you, as for 22-23, which was this school year, what our total budget was for the school district. So our budget was $262 million, approximately, to be able to educate our students. We received 27.9% from the city share and 72.1% from the state share. If you look at the other districts, it will show you how much the state contributed and how much the city contributed. Only New Haven on the city level contributed less than the city of Bridgeport. Okay. As you look down here for Alliance ECS total state, there was a change in monies that's received. We received $15,434. So when you look at all of our neighboring districts, they received exponentially more dollars to be able to support us. I'm sorry, guys, not sure why we're having this technical difficulty. But here, when you look at that, Alliance Alliance districts are school districts across the state of Connecticut who have been identified in regards to student academics, demographics, free and reduced lunch. So that's part of this Alliance label. So we all receive additional funds because of that label. And if you look at that, we only receive $15,434.
And if you notice the one asterisk on the bottom, New Haven's district listed local contribution of 28%, which is not reflected on the top, which actually leads to more dollars being contributed and actually leads to Bridgeport being dead last again, percentage-wise.
So this slide highlights special education and how much of our annual budget is dedicated to students who receive special education services, which includes pull-out services, resource services, social work. They might receive occupational therapy, speech and language. So that is all categorized in special education category. So for 21-22, 26.14% of our budget that includes grants was spent in regards to special education, which came to approximately $95.9 million. All right. The percent of our general fund, which is our operating budget, was 30.12%, which is the total. So that gave us $76 million here. All right. So when you look at those two numbers there, that's where you get the sum total of the $95.9 million that was spent. I think what's really important to note here is that you see that it says percent of total budget, including grants. Grants are flexible. Every single year, Bridgeport Public Schools heavily relies upon grant funding to be able to provide essential services to our scholars. Without these grants, we would not be able to provide the services that we have. So when you look at this is inclusive of that. So every single year when we're creating the budget and looking at the needs and the increasing populations, we have to make an estimate about what we think we'll get in grants. That is not promised and it's constantly fluctuating, although our population of students in special education services is totally increasing.
Yes, thank you. Also to note in this, if you remember a couple of slides back, the special education population is 18.86% of the budget. I mean, 18.86% of the students, yet they consume 26.14% of the budget. So the other 82% of our students have 26% less of our funds to be allocated towards their education.
So what are some of the fiscal challenges that we face? So we look here, we see our challenges and our control costs, and that they all are putting into our budget. So we have special education and English language services. We have utility costs that, as we all know, are currently rising, legal services, transportation, which is inclusive of our neighborhood busing, busing for our middle school sports and high school sports, as well as our special education transportation. Benefits for certified and non-certified staffing, and absence coverage in the case where we need to cover absences for certified staff. So cost control management examples. Again, so this is some of the numbers that we can look at when we're talking about certain things that we're trying to be able to control within our operating budget. So going into contractual agreements with various constituents to create fixed costs so that we will be more prepared for the upcoming fiscal cliff, right? So what are we doing? So for transportation, we are in contract with We Transportation that provides all of our bus servicing. All right, so annual expenditures is approximately $23 million. We're engaged in a 5-year contract. Here it talks about the percentage yearly of increase that we are receiving in our contract. Our buses and the cost for our regular buses every single day. So that's listed here. Here it also talks about some free buses that we receive. So we receive 10 free trips per month from We Transport for a total of 100 per year. One of the reasons why we decided to go with this contract, because they were willing to give something back to the city to be in contract with them. So that's a total savings cost of $23,500 that we receive a year from being in contract with them. Of course, copier and print services for Xerox. That is the company that we have serviced to do all of our negotiating with our copiers in the school system for everywhere. So that's what we have. That's 20 to 30,000 estimated for built-in savings with a projected expenditure of $1.1 million here. Substitute staffing service, we are in agreement with Kelly Educational Staffing, which costs us approximately $4.5 million per year, and we're under a 3-year contract here. And of course, energy usage, which is utilities, all right? So we are projected at $7.6 million. Our contract allows for a possible savings of $250,000 if we're using continued energy conservation measures. So what does that mean? That means if we're on vacation, that, all the lights are off and everything is turned off at the building. So there's certain contests that are run throughout the district for schools who are making sure that they're doing that. And they look at the percentage of savings that are done across the district, and we give out different prizes, just a way to encourage and use an initiative to be able to make sure that we're working on conserving energy as much as possible with the rising costs.
Yes, like you, public, our bills go up every single year. I would just like everybody to keep in mind the smallest percentage increase on that 5-year contract, because the cost of the transportation is going up. That's 32.5%. That's going to be an important number to look at going forward, because if your costs go up, your revenue got to go up. So if we just look at that bus contract, our revenue should be going up 3.25% if it's flushed through all the other things.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Calvin.
So anyone else, it's just me.
Did you understand what he said last time? Thank you. Okay, for transportation, this just breaks it down a little bit further in regards to our expenditures for fiscal year 22 and what was projected for our 23. So if you see here, we spent approximately $5.8 million, and the projection is $6 million for here. Athletics, it's broken down, 0.15 million here, all right? And then it's projected to rise to 0.20 million. For charter, 1.5 million here, an increase of approximately $100,000 here. Special education, 14 million, projected to rise to 14.6. For parochial and non-public, 0.6 million, projected to rise to 0.65 million. SPED charter schools, 0.3 million, projected to rise to 0.35 million. So here we have a total cost of approximately 23.4 million, but we believe that there is going to be an increase based upon cost, and this will probably wind up around 24 million.
All right, now, very important thing to know here also is if you look at the special ed charter schools, the parochial non-public schools, and the charter school line, none of those students are in Bridgeport Public Schools. Yet the expenses come out of Bridgeport Public Schools budget. This leaves approximately $2.4 million, another $2.4 million that is not spent on any of our students. That $2.4 million is not spent on any single Bridgeport Public School student. That's pulled out of our budget. Before, we cannot spend that on them because we're spending that on students that go to other schools.
So core curriculum renewal cycle. So this slide is extremely important because this highlights all of the expenditures that we have to provide curriculum to all of our scholars in grades pre-K to 12. So of course that comes at an extended cost to the city to be able to provide curriculum in all of our major content areas. So here it just lists the number of contracts, number of years of the contract cycle here. So it ranges from 4 to 6 years across the district. And these are the costs that are associated with each of those. And one of the things to also highlight is as we are going into contracts over the course of this time, you notice it says 4 to 6 years, but what happens during that course of those 4 to 6 years, if there's something newer that's introduced that would be better served to fit the needs of our students, we still have this cost and we will constantly incur new ones to be able to provide updated curriculum for our scholars in each of the content areas.
Yes, definitely. I would imagine if I'm in Greenwich, Stanford, or some of the more affluent districts, that they don't have to take these considerations into account. Let's look at science. Science is the fastest moving discipline in our schools. There's coming up with new science every day. I'm a science geek and I'm heavily promote the sciences. So now can you imagine the scientific discoveries that can happen in 24 and 25 and 26 and 27? But we have to hold off on purchasing new books that encompasses all those, and we have to carefully consider that because we just don't have the budget for it.
So perfect time. You had a question. So we do, they don't update us. So we are responsible for updating our own curriculum based upon different requirements and mandates that are made at the state level. But however, the way that we're trying to save money and for cost efficiency, you go into longer contracts to be able to secure something that we're actually able to pay for. So it's not just one-sided. We have to think about the resources that we have to be able to provide the curriculum as well. Yes.
The 2.4 million that's spent outside of the Bridgeport, that Bridgeport has to somehow take or take responsibility of. Why is that?
So you're talking about for special education, charter, non-parochial, all that. So we are responsible because those are Bridgeport residents. So
Yeah, that's required by law under the state statute. Because they're Bridgeport students, we have to pay their transportation costs. And it's something I've always disagreed with because if you're going to have, not only pulling our students out, which we could get more funding for and concentrate our dollars in more than one space to get specialization, we're spreading those dollars over more and more schools and having to pay parochial schools, they charge tuition. If you're charging tuition, right, if you're charging tuition, why can't you pay for your transportation costs? And if you have a charter school, it's going a separate funding stream, which currently there's bills to give them even more money. Why should we have to pay for the charter school students to go to the schools because they are not under the Bridgeport public school system?
And aside from having to pay for transportation costs, specifically as it relates to parochial and charter schools, we also provide nursing services to them as well. And we also provide special education services when it comes to support services. So those are all things that come out of our operating budget as well. You are asking that correctly, but I can't speak to where their funds are going. I just know that state statute requires that public schools are the ones who provide it. No, I am not.
Right, it doesn't. And absolutely, I get your point. You're asking the question in a proper manner. We have no oversight of charter schools. We have no oversight of private schools. Bridgeport public schools and any public school system are subjected to the strictest oversight by the state, by the board. But we have no say over, we got to release the money. We see how much the transportation budget is because we do coordinate that, but As far as the rest of their budget, we don't have any oversight over them.
Any other questions at this time before we move into the next part? I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Albert Benajendra, who is one of our board members, as he smiles in the front. So now we're going into the second part of the presentation. This is the budget overview for school year 22-23, which is our current year. So here you notice that this slide is broken down into four parts. We went over this in an earlier slide, but it's just a different heuristic for you to take a look at. We have the city share at 27.9% of our operating budget and the state ECS share at 72.1%. So here, if you look at that, so they're telling the city share is approximately $73 million. In addition to that, we received $2 million from the city to support Bridgeport Public Schools during this course of this school year. For the state ECS, it was a total of $188.9 million. And of that, $164 million was ECS funding. And then the Alliance ECS funding was $24.7 million. Then we received the additional $15,434 that was highlighted in a previous slide to encompass our total budget of $262 million. The bottom half of this, which is extremely important, is we notice these two numbers here, that equals 100%. So that does give us our whole operating budget. But at the bottom, if you notice, it's cut in half because these are the federal and state grants that we receive that help provide essential services for our 19,321 students. So federal grants, we have Title I, Title IIA, Title III, IDEA, which gives us approximately $22 million. IDEA, for those of you who are unclear, that is the federal grant that we received to help fund special education services. So whenever someone talks about IDEA, that's what they're referencing. When you go to a PPT meeting and they talk to you about your laws and rights as parents, it's all falls under IDEA. Okay. For state grants, we received the Priority Grant, Bilingual Plus, and Magnet for a total of $12.5 million. So on each side, it shows you exactly what we've received for this school year. Priority at $76,657, and then we have this at $225,000 approximately here. Magnet schools specifically are funding our magnet school high schools that receive Fairchild Wheeler. We apply for grants to be able to support efforts in those schools as well. But if you look at the sum total of $34.5 million, just think about this. This is flexible. This fluctuates every single year. So what happens if we get a major decrease in any of these funding sources? This dramatically decreases, but our needs continuously rise. And that's one of the things that a lot of districts don't have conversations about, is that impact that we're funding essential services for our children. This is not an addition to, okay? This is the bare minimum that we need to be able to provide.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to draw your attention back up to the operating costs, and especially that number, $2,015,400. That is our total increase in operating costs, $2,015,434. Keep that number in mind. It's going to be very important in a few months.
So again, this highlights the city share and state share again. And if you notice, the number that Mr. Sokolovic just spoke about, that $2,015,434, which is what we received from the city, is what he was referencing here. So if you take the addition, this total here that we received from the city, it was a change of 0.78%. Okay, 0.78% is all that we received in addition from the city to be able to fund our Bridgeport Public Schools.
And if you remember back to that percentage I asked you to remember, the 2.25% increase, 2.75 short.
So if you take a look at this slide, it's extremely important because it's the average percentage growth over 8 years. Okay. So if you look at, if we go back here to fiscal year 16, this is where we are. So this is what the percentage growth from our total budget. So we were at 2.5% there. If you go to fiscal year 17, which was an extremely difficult year for the city, we decreased by 0.45%. Okay. Fiscal year 18, 0.06% increase. Fiscal year 19, 1.36%. Fiscal year 20, 1.59%. 21, 1.82%. 22, 1.38%. And for projected is 0.78%. So that's an average over the course of 8 years of 1.12% over 8 years. So really think about that. If you think about your homes and your budgets that you have there, that you've only been able to increase, even though your bills are going up exponentially, but you only have an additional 1.12% to be able to contribute to those overall costs. That is where we are, the position we are as a public school system. So, as I spoke about earlier, at the onset of the pandemic, we received a total of $144.9 million. That was a one-time funding source that was given to Bridgeport Public Schools to be expended over a 3-year cycle. This ends on 9/30/24. All right. So all these funds have to be spent by then. And these are all the services that we are utilizing these funds to support. Our Director of Early Childhood Education, this is for our pre-K 3 and pre-K 4 scholars. Assistant principal positions in various buildings in the city. Elementary academic support instructors. What are those? So these are interventionists that are working in our public schools to be able to support reading in our K-3 classrooms. And this is also part of the mandated reading bill that came down from the state. So these are essential and it's being supported in here. Once these funds go away, how do we meet the mandates of the state without them? Our guidance counselors, at least 10 people. Social workers, at least 11 people. English language learning students, the Welcome Center at Central High School, as well as teachers. Building substitutes. So every building in the city of Bridgeport has one assigned building substitute, just in case there is an occasional absence from a staff member that's being funded there. Kindergarten paraprofessionals. So I don't know how many of you are familiar, but many years ago, I believe it was in fiscal year 17, we lost the funding to be able to provide each kindergarten classroom with a paraprofessional. So that's someone who's in there with those 4 and 5-year-olds to be able to help out the teacher. Okay. So with the ESSER funds, we were able to secure funding to be able to reinstate that on a half-day basis. That will be going away soon at the end of the year to be able to provide that support. Okay. Stipended positions like teacher leader, peer support, additional SysOp and DIBELS expert. Who are they? So teacher leaders are teachers that are in the building who receive stipends to provide professional development for their peers. All right. SysOp, those are the people who help out with all of the technology in the buildings. DIBELS expert. DIBELS is a district-based assessment system that we use for students in grades K-3 to be able to determine their level of access to foundational reading skills. So we have an expert in each building to do that, and they are paid a stipend to do that. University partnerships like cross-certification programs, parent to teacher. So we are trying to increase our ability to be able to attract and recruit teachers. So we go into cross-certification programs with existing teachers in the district. If they want to get certified in a shortage area like math or science or special education, we use some of these resources to help pay for those teachers, and also to be able to support our paraprofessional population who wants to go on and become a certified teacher. So we help support that as well. Extended day programs, they're different across the district, but one that we know about is FAME. That's one that we do. This is an art center program across the district that services lots of our special needs students who have a great interest in the arts. Summer programs like early reading summer program, extended school year, ELL, and our 21st century STEM program that offers different programs like coding and science related and robotics programs at various schools in the district. Curriculum instruction and professional development renewal. So actively learn, which supports our ELA and social studies curriculum, Hill to Literacy, which is the program that we use for grades K to 6 right now. And we also receive professional development and coaching to be able to provide to our teachers. Tech Prep, Footsteps to Brilliance for Pre-K 3, Partners for Educational Leadership. This is the one that services and provides professional development to all of our principals and administrators, as well as our executive staff in each of the buildings. And also Caribe Youth, which is responsible for our middle school basketball league, is all funded here. Our technology renewal support, operating budget and e-cards, special education, which is some of the things that we receive as effective solutions, which this is a program that's currently in 15 of our schools that provide additional therapeutic services to identify scholars. Self-contained classes and resource teachers. We've, of course, had a rise in a need for that. So we have funded some of those out of these funds. And safe and healthy environments, which includes facility repairs and improvements, inspection, testing, maintenance, repair, and upgrades.
That's definitely important to note in this slide. Look at the top. ESSER grants and supplemental services. They expire 9/30/24. We're not talking about the operating budget here. So all these positions you see here, with the exception of a few that the operating budget is covering a little bit of a deficit in some of these, we're allowed, we can move some funding over. But what do we think is going to happen to all these services that are funded outside the operating budget once that money dries up? Of course, they're going to be likely the first to go because we didn't have them before. And we don't have the money to continue paying for them. So that's before we even get to the operating budget cuts that may be necessary later on down the road. This is what we talk about when we talk about the fiscal cliff. 9/30/24, coming very, very soon.
Will you please take a moment to acknowledge another board member who just entered the room, Christine Baptiste Perez. Wave at everyone. Ms. Baptiste Perez, thank you. So I'm going to pause for questions. I saw a question. Yes. Okay, let me go back. You tell me which one you're referencing, okay? This one? Okay. Oh, no, we apply for way more grants, but this is the bulk of where these monies come from. So the bulk of our grants are these. But we apply for grants. We have a grants department whose sole responsibility is to search out and seek opportunities to apply for grants and see where we are able to be able to push in other services. But these are the bulk of the major ones that we have. Yes.
Are the grants, there's some way that they can help supplement all the other services, like, substitutes and paraprofessionals? Does any of the money come from here?
So for building substitutes, so here, this specifically, when I went to like this slide, let me go back to it, highlight it for you. So here where it talks about like, are you a building substitute or a daily substitute? So building substitutes currently are funded from that because that's the every day you go into the building and may cover. So they're specifically covered under the ESSER funds. So we do have a pot of funding for occasional. So if you remember prior to pandemic, we didn't have substitutes who were housed in a school building. You would just get the call and you would pick up the call. But specifically, the building substitutes where we know that body's going to be there every day, it comes from this specific grant. That will be ending, correct, unless we find another funding source. Okay. Go ahead. No, it's fine.
So essentially, the teachers will be suffering. Very, very difficult. I don't know how many parents understand that, but and when teachers are out, I mean, teachers are leaving. I don't know if everybody's aware, but they are walking out. I mean, I'm in class where teachers are leaving. You know, they're dropping everything. So I don't know what's going to happen here on the 30th, and if you guys have a plan set to tackle that. I mean, I understand the other facilities, but we do need. I'm not speaking. I'm not being biased for myself, but you know, you do need a house schedule. You do need at least a substitute. You need all of these because the kids, you know, they just need. This is a necessity. They need these things.
Absolutely, you're correct. And you started speaking about the teacher shortage that's nationwide. It's not specific to Connecticut or Bridgeport.
Right.
It is nationwide. And why is that? The profession within itself is being, is not being given the respect that it has been given in the past. And it's becoming more and more difficult because children are coming to the table with more and more needs, and people are having more difficulty being able to service those needs. So when you're talking about that, our plan is, yes, we're trying, that's why we're having the cross certification programs to try to get people involved in getting certified and trying to do different things to attract to the city of Bridgeport to service. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about how difficult it was. I was a substitute teacher for 3 years, and that's exactly how I started. I said, and if I was not successful there, I would have never went on to get my certification because a lot of people don't understand it. And I always tell people as they start thinking about going into the teaching profession that one of the most valuable things that you can do is go in and substitute and start figuring out what your bandwidth is to be able to deal with the needs of children and how you're going to build those foundational skills. Because without those, you're not going to be able to go in. It's one thing to go in on a day-to-day basis to replace someone, but to really go in and grow roots per se and be able to build relationships, be able to master curriculum and core content and deal with all the professional responsibilities, it is quite overwhelming.
I want to ask this as sensitive as I can because, as you know, there is an influx now of migrants that are coming in, and ESL teaching is so essential, maybe even more than some of these. I myself teach ESL, and I enjoy it very much. But the students are in desperate need of just more help. So is there anything that is being done? Because the students are there already.
Absolutely.
So, I that specifically, do you have any plans around how you're going to address those ESL students that being helped in training the classes, administrators help, all that stuff?
So right now we have a director of English language art, not English language arts, ELL, excuse me, who is working to recruit, but that's also another shortage area for teachers. Elementary teachers, we can get those everywhere, but when you're talking about your math, your science, your EL, that is also a shortage area, but really working with these current staff, EL teachers as well as regular teachers to be able to provide them the professional development for strategies to be able to engage them. Because I think one of the issues that we're encountering is we see that they say, okay, the students speak another language. We don't speak that language. It becomes someone else's responsibility, but it doesn't. It's almost the same lens as under special education. When you think about those students, they're not someone else's responsibility. They're all of our responsibilities. So teaching them and giving them the strategies, it's not their fault that they don't know. This is new territory. And as we get new populations of students, we have to be able to address them. So really creating opportunities for professional development to teach strategies to be able to support those students, but also trying to hire and retain more EL teachers to be able to support it specifically during those first 3 years as they're coming into the district and they're trying to acquire the language.
Yeah, I would like to go back to the first part of your question about building substitutes, because as a parent of a child in Bridgeport Public School Systems, my student has felt the effects. But we did not have a substitute for the day because of a shortage or because of lack of funding or whatever the reason. My son was sent to another classroom. So we had classrooms with 28 kids, and he wasn't always sent to his grade. When he was in the third grade, he might be in anywhere from a fifth grade classroom to a kindergarten classroom. So for those days that the substitutes are not available, he was not learning that day what he should be, or as he should be. So as far as substitutes, of course, we would try to get them. But if the funding isn't there to have all of them, and we lose the substitutes, we're in trouble. And as far as the English language learners and stuff like that, we are legally mandated to provide those services, ELL and special education students. But keep in mind, it is a shortage area, and we may not be able to recruit despite our best efforts. When you look at all the underfunded, all the ways we're underfunded, and you look at the up here districts receiving more per pupil and all that, guess what that could be spent on? Salaries. Salaries are higher in all our surrounding districts. So how are we going to recruit a scarce resource such as ELL teachers or special education teachers when they could get an extra not a couple of thousand, actually tens of thousands of dollars by just working 20 miles away? So we have a very hard time recruiting because we can't pay as much. And even though we're trying, and what happens if we can't recruit as much? We suffer. Even if we can recruit as much, also within our budgetary constraints, as you saw, the percentages are quite skewed towards ELL and special education services. Those monies will come out of the operating budget and leave less money to be spent on the remainder of our students.
Are the charter schools experiencing the same?
We provide charter schools with their special education services. We are mandated under the law. I'm not sure about the ELL students.
So ELL, as far as that, we don't provide any services to charter for EL, but they are receiving and experiencing some of the same influx of people coming in, but we don't provide services, so I can't speak directly to how that's impacting them. For special education, we are mandated to be able to do that, so we do have to do that as well. And I just wanted to share one other thought with you. You had talked about EL and the population coming in. There is a bill at the state level currently that's at the table for legislation about the Bill of Rights for EL students. And it lists approximately 15 to 16 different things to be able to make sure that our students who are coming in have the opportunity to receive a free and appropriate education, just like everyone else. However, again, that's an unfunded mandate that's coming down from the state. So it's on the table to be able to move through. And currently, if it goes through and it's passed, we will have to make sure that we're doing everything that is listed. Some of the things that are on there is having translators at every single building, all sorts of things that we don't have the funds to be able to provide to our scholars right now. Do we have ways to be able to do that? Are there multilingual staff at each and every building? Absolutely. But is there somebody there who may be specific to that population or that language? No. So it does look very different. And when we get these unfunded mandates that come down from the state, it further puts additional strains on our operating budgets, because now we have to figure out ways and have to cut from somewhere else to be able to provide these services. You're welcome. So now we're going into the part of the presentation. This is the last part of the presentation about operating budget requests for school year 23-24. So this heuristic is very similar to the one we saw before, but it's talking about the monies for our next school year. So we're looking at a total cost of $288.5 million. All right. So with the city share being approximately $73 million, the city request is $12.4 million, which is 4.3% of our total fiscal year budget. Okay. At the state, we're projected to receive from ECS $164 million approximately, and with Alliance at 24.7. We need an additional $26.5 million from this school year to next to be able to meet the bare minimum of essential needs. We are projected to receive an additional $1.5 million from the state. All right. And we have a BOE budget gap plan to be able to address this $12.6 million that we would need to be able to close the budget. Again, if you look at the bottom, it's pretty much the same as we saw in the last heuristic in regards to the federal and state grants with a total of the $34.5 million. So these are non-discretionary costs that we will need that come from this $26.5 million increase from year 22-23 to 23-24. So collective bargaining agreements, these are all of your certified staff union contracts, all right, as well as that we are as well as non-certified that we're always under right now. So the projected growth amount is $5.3 million for next school year. For health insurance, 3.3. MRF, this is for non-certified staff, $1 million. Transportation costs, $1.1 million. Utilities, $1.7 million. Special education, $1.8 million. And then we have something called the Internal Service Fund. All right, so this is something that has been an internal service fund that we've been able to save funds throughout the course of the years, depending on vacancies that we had or projections that were inaccurate, $6.5 million. And that was from fiscal year 23. And the projection is to apply another $2.5 million with the surplus from 21. Vacancy fill factor. What is that? So for each and every vacancy that we have in the city of Bridgeport, when it comes down to certified staff, we allocate a certified staff member to be hired or to be placed in that space. If there is not one that is available or we're not able to hire based upon various reasons, then we have a savings that we incur. So that's approximately projected at $4 million. And then the reserve is approximately $300,000. Okay. Turnover savings here. So this is staff turnover. So usually if someone leaves or they either move to another district, they retire, or through attrition, there is usually a savings projected with the hiring of new staff because usually they come in at a lower salary. So that's approximately $1 million. That's the projected savings to give us $26.5 million.
Does everybody remember the number I asked you to remember before, as far as how much of an increase we got last year? Don't. It was $2,015,000. Look at our first line of increased costs, $5,300,000. Look at our second line, $3,300,000. We can't cover either one of those costs alone. Never mind the combined numbers. If you look at all the combined numbers in blue, you got like $12.4 million in increased costs that are not going to go away no matter what. So this is the operating budget. If we get $2,015,000 increase again, what will happen? We will be short by approximately $10 million in our operating budget, which is not including what we discussed before, the ESSER funding. That's a whole separate bunch of cuts. So now we're looking at approximately $10 million in projected cuts that will be possible after 2024 when the fiscal cliff arrives, because as I mentioned before, we're able to shift some slight costs towards the ESSER funding. And also, if you look here, a lot of confusion is always around the internal service funds. Those are savings we were able to capture and put in a separate account for emergency situations, which we are in dire emergency now. But once that fund is exhausted, there's nothing but cuts.
So here, this slide is important because it shows the budget gap history with position reductions. So since 16-17, it shows you all the different positions that were cut throughout these years for a total of 243 positions that have been cut at Bridgeport Public Schools. If you look at them, you see kindergarten parents, homeschool coordinators. We used to have liaisons at each of our schools to be able to work with parents in the community. That was cut. Math instructional coaches. Those were coaches who were in-house to be able to support with math instruction. Literacy coaches, the same. Guidance counselors, elementary. So each of our schools used to have their own individual guidance counselor to be able to support some of the service needs. That's been cut in several schools, share counselors in the district. The career and craftsman program. All right, nurses, huge issue. We have children who get sick during the course of the day, but we don't have enough nursing staff to be able to provide each of our schools with nurses. And aside from that, we also provide nurses to our parochial and charter schools as well. So our nursing staff has been reduced greatly. Attendance liaisons and school suspension officers, we don't have those anymore. The parent center has been dismantled. Family resource centers, clerical, school resource officers, security guards, university interns, administrators, which are your principals and assistant principals, facilities department, school volunteer office, district office part-time workers and full-time. So we've already cut all of these different things. What's left to cut for our students? What's left?
Yes, my first year on the board was 2018, 2019 cuts. I came into the board and immediately had to start cutting. And if you look at those cuts right down there, we lost 41 positions my first year on the board, 12 positions my second year on the board. If you go back to the grand total, you go minus 2,043. Notice what numbers aren't on this. We're not hiding information from you, but in the 21-22 school year, that 22-23 school year, we don't see cuts. Now, why is that? This is because of the COVID funding. COVID, I like to call sometimes, it sounds a little crass, but it's a blessing in disguise for Bridgeport Public Schools because we were able to stop the slide. We were able to bring attention on how this city is woefully underfunded as far as education goes and how our students lack the devices to even log on online outside. And this brought a rescue plan that was able to stave off cuts for at least close to 4 years. But these cuts have been accumulating quietly in the background. The need for these cuts still do exist once the money runs out. And I can't emphasize enough, once this money is gone, we got to resume making cuts. And look at the cuts we already made. Those cuts were considered the easiest cuts to make back then. Those were considered the easiest cuts left back then. Everything else was considered too sacred to even touch. But where do we look next when we have to cut? We're going to have to look to those sacred spots. Because we, again, like I said before, we cannot deficit spend, we cannot borrow, we cannot beg, we can beg. Begging is a big part of our funding, but we can't steal either.
So how are we going to close this gap if we don't receive the necessary fundings to get to that $26.5 million that we need, right? So here it just breaks down the equation further that the request is $12.4 million from the state from the city, at 4.7% growth, and the state 1.5 million at 0.6% growth. However, we're going to be looking to the internal service fund. So to receive a projected $7.1 million. All right. So it says fiscal year 21 reserve withdraw from the balance. Okay. Internal service fund again. All right. This will be for fiscal year 22. All right. So they will withdraw from this balance. That's to be determined because that's currently this year to figure out how much money we'll be looking at to be able to do that. For grant revenue, we're looking at using approximately $1 million in our ESSER because it's the final year to be able to service eligible services that are compliant with the grant guidelines. We're looking at grant revenue here for $1 million to apply an additional $1 million in Title I to eligible services. So that would be from that grant. And then the gap reduction strategies, approximately 3.5 million, which includes vacancies and vacancy coverage savings. So we're looking at getting this money based upon the number of vacancies that we're projected to have and depending upon the fill rate.
Again, the internal service fund is one of the most misunderstood funds there is. It's like, why you don't spend that? Why you don't spend that? Look, it's just sort of like your bank account. Everybody who's able to will have an emergency savings for if they get laid off, if the emergency comes up. But once you spend that money, we get laid off, we still pay our mortgages, our rents, we chip into their funds. At some point, those funds run out, and then you're in real trouble. So once the funds are gone, they're not coming back.
The budget gap plan will include, as in prior years, the following strategies: position consolidation in alignment with the registration projections. So what are they talking about here? This is about, say, for instance, we have a class that we have projected there'll be, 25 children in, okay? And we don't have those 25 children, we get 2. So what we would do is we would close that class and those children would go to another class within the school, and that would save us a position in a teacher's salary, okay? Position conversions after attrition. So for example, instead of having a 12-month assistant principal who would work throughout the summer to plan for next year, it would change into a 10-month assistant principal position. So they would not work during the summer, which would save money. Position program adjustments to generate savings while enhancing effectiveness and operational efficiency. Curriculum technology renewal. Utilization of grants in lieu of funds. So meaning for anything that we need when it comes down to specifically curriculum and technology, that we would seek grants to be able to pay for those instead of funds. Okay. Deficit prevention mode, which would be position control, procurement control, and internal controls, which basically all means that we'll be looking at ways to reduce staffing costs in any area that we possibly could to be able to make up the difference. That's really what that says.
Yes, I always have a pet peeve about this slide when you talk about position consolidation. When you consolidate, that means make more into less. And what that means is we will have less positions. Where those positions will come from remains to be seen. So if we got, say, 5 teachers and there's a reduction in class, we may have 4 teachers. It may not be done through layoffs, but it'll be maybe through attrition or what have you, but there will be less staff. And as far as controlling procurement, that means buying less stuff. That means we'll have less supplies for our students. That means have a lot less. So these words, consolidation, controls, and all that, that just means cutbacks, cuts.
This continues with the deficit prevention mode. All right, so it talks about what areas to be looking to be able to make some of those cuts that Mr. Sakala was talking about. District office vacancies are reviewed to reassess need and generate savings. Okay, effective on 3/1/24, employment of new teacher hires will cease, except in shortage areas. Long-term substitutes will cover vacant positions. The district derives savings when vacant positions are covered by substitute personnel due to a lack of certified and/or qualified candidate. Stringent enforcement is in place to ensure orders are processed for services and supplies that are mandated or essential only and at an economical cost. Restrictions, approval of workflows, and cost-effective practices are applied rigorously to all services, personnel, and non-personnel. So what does the operating budget fund? So these are all the various positions across our district: principals, assistant principals, school clericals, which are our secretaries and executive assistants, teachers in our classrooms, all right, for all subjects: ELL, SPED, TAG, okay, special education, paraprofessionals, Student services, which are our psychologists, social workers, speech and language pathologists, hearing impaired, and occupational therapy. Our school guidance counselors, athletic programs, nurses, security officers, transportation, legal services, operating budgets for schools, curriculum renewal, summer and high school credit, recovery, SPED extended school year, adult education, okay, superintendent, finance, technology, food and nutrition services, executive directors, instruction and professional development, facilities and custodial services and building maintenance, human resources, data management systems, and student counseling and parent partnerships. So that's what those funds are needed for, to be able to supply and support the 110 full-time employees. And this does not include that the 110 full-time employees, but Bridgeport Services, we have over 3,000 certified staff, and we have more than that in the non-certified. So when you think about those different services and people that we're hiring to be able to provide the different services that we provide at Bridgeport Public Schools, it's massive. The impact is massive. And the only persons or the only people that it hurts when we don't have the necessary resources are the children.
Yes, and it's also important to note that this is the operating budget fund, which we're advocating to try to get another $26 million to cover. So then we're talking about, this is where the $26 million shortfall will fall from this. That's excluding the cuts we may have to make to the COVID budget, the ESSER, but the loss of the ESSER funds. So this is going to be an exponential impact. This is what we talk about when we say the fiscal cliff, the fiscal cliff. It sounds like a buzzword, but it's not a buzzword. It's a real cliff, and it's coming.
So here, this breaks down the percentage of what each of these specific pieces are in the operating budget. So for instruction, 68.9% of our budget. Okay. Then it's instruction here, which is 0.2%, but this instruction is specifically talking about personnel. So that's why that number is different. Okay. Student support, 6.8%, administration, 0.9%, and administrative support, 23.2%. All right. And down here, it breaks it down into the dollar amount. That 8.9% equates to $198.8 million here. Instruction support, approximately $625,000. Student support, that 6.8 is 19.6 million. Administration, 2.4 million. And then administrative support services at 67 million for our grand total of $288.6 million.
All right, now, maybe we should take questions before. Do we have any questions at this point? Hearing none. All right, now we've all heard this doom and gloom, but we are not powerless here. How can you help? Bridgeport Public Schools, we rely on a variety of funding sources, as you saw through this presentation. Educational funding advocates should rely on a variety of advocacy tactics best geared toward the specific goal being advocated for. It's important to understand how much the district needs to avoid cuts. Groups and individuals should avoid coming up with its own number lower than the district's request. This is harmful to the cause. It gives approval to the people responsible for funding that it is acceptable to shortchange our students and eliminates the political pressure. It's okay to aim higher if you wish to expand the services offered to your children, rather than just holding to the status quo. Groups should insist that any funds coming from the city go directly to the NBR. That's the minimum budget requirement. That means they got to give us the same adjustment next year as this year. Also important to remember is advocacy should be targeted and tailored to the specific entity and funding source. For instance, when advocating for federal dollars, keep the focus on the federal shortfall, what the federal government could do. Do not mention the state or local shortcomings to the federal government. The same holds true when advocating for state funding. Do not mention local funding shortfalls. The reason for this is not following this advice. It allows for the federal, state, and the city to blame each other for underfunding educations. Let them know that you, as a voter, will hold each of them accountable if they don't significantly increase their share of funding. Remember, advocating for education is about the issues, not the group. Credit does not matter, only the outcome matters. The primary goal of our advocacy should be to get a steady, reliable source of increased funding in order to cover escalating costs rather than fighting every year just to keep our heads above water. Now, everybody received in their packet, I'm not going to go through the list all in the interest of time. Everybody received in their packet when they walked in a list of senators and city councilors and state representatives. These are the people you talk to. And if you have any questions about this, we'd be happy to take them right now. And just want to point out our next advocacy opportunity will be in front of the city sometime in April. And everybody should really pay attention and focus on the city budget, as that's where more of our money should definitely come from. Thank you.
Are there any other questions at this time? Ms. Baptiste Perez, would you like to say something?
So I'll just stay down here. I want to thank all of you for being here today. This is my second year on the board. I hold the position as vice chair. And to see parents, educators, everyone here listening to the budget, because this year is very critical. We're not going to be safe, ironically, with COVID money. And it really will take the power of your voice and your additional advocacy. One of the big lessons I've learned as a board member is that we are at the helms and at the will of city council, the mayor, and the state when it comes to funding for our children. And we should not be ignored. This is the basic foundation, the building block for our community as people of color, as human beings in general, to prepare our next generation. So I hope that everyone here is registered to vote. Everybody here, that list that was shown, it doesn't hurt to reach out via email or call a senator or a city council person and say, this is your need. You may not hear anything back, but remember that you didn't get that call back. Remember that you didn't get that email back. If we come to the very worst case scenario and your child's school closed, remember who was in office and keep that energy towards them, because we're going to be fighting and consolidating and trying to advocate for additional money and funds. But ultimately, who that comes from demonstrates whether they really care or not for our children. And so if you can share this content, even at that most highest range, with a friend of a friend, your neighbor, because I understand this is may not be the best time to come out, or even share the YouTube link with a friend on Facebook. The content of this is very important because of the dire need of our schools. I wasn't around when we had those previous budget cuts, but the idea of kindergarten teachers losing their paras, when in some districts they have 4 paras in the kindergarten classroom, and some of our teachers may have none. That's the core foundation. That's where they're learning their alphabets, or they're learning the beginning of phonics. So we want that. We want the best for our kids. Our kids deserve the best. And part of that has to come from us as a people coming together and letting everybody know. Even if you're not happy with me on the board, I am up for an election in 2 years. Everybody can be replaced if they're not going to serve the big picture for our city and for our students living in this city. So I hope that you share this. You can always feel free to get my contact information. I will come and talk to your church. I will come and talk to your group because I love these presentations to go out to the community, but part of it too, and I felt this is my own duty, is to try and spread this word to as many people as possible and to empower you all that your vote matters and your vote carries power. And you'll see those people on election day now ask for your vote. But when you were asking for help now and in the upcoming months before a primary in August or before the general election in November, and you were ignored, that's an indicator on how you should vote. That's just my opinion. But thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your support. I care about your students. And God bless you all.
Thank you. I just want to give any of you an opportunity if you'd like to speak. I'd like you to give you that opportunity if anybody wants to address the audience. It's okay. It's all right because your voices are extremely important. And it's extremely important that we continuously advocate for the city of Bridgeport and for our children. We're constantly seeing and hearing negative things about things that happen here, but we're not pouring in to be able to make sure we provide what we need to support them at their most vulnerable state. This is where they learn everything. This is their stage, and this is where they take it in. And we want them to become productive members of society and become successful in their own rights, but we need to be able to provide them the resources to do so. So using your voice to be able to do so and advocate for dollars, for resources is what we need from every citizen in the city of Bridgeport, not just someone coming in when it is time to vote. I'm a resident. I've lived here forever. So, I work here, yes, but I live here. My home is here. So I'm always going to advocate in that sense. And it's extremely important that we spread the word, even if it's a conversation over dinner or you're talking to one of your family members, talk to them about some of the things that you heard today. Encourage them to take the time to look at the presentation. They're online. They're available to do so because we need them and we need them to be here and yelling and screaming on behalf of their children. We don't need 26.5. We need 27, 28, 29. We need as much as we possibly can because, like Mr. Sakalovic pointed out, those ESSER funds gave us additional monies. It was approximately, almost $2,500 additional per pupil that we received because of that, and we were able to provide additional services. And even with those services, it's not enough. We still can point to several different places where there are deficit areas that we don't have enough people to be able to meet the need. So use your voices. They're the most powerful things that you have. Thank you.